Hey guys, this is Wise Guy Talks coming to you with episode number 4. I am the Wise Guy. Thanks for listening to us. In tonight's episode, we're going to have a discussion about race and what is the definition of race. Remember, there's a couple things you can do to make this show a little bit better. Give us comments, any questions that you may have. We'd appreciate that. Follow us, like us, subscribe to us, hit the little bell on there that dings whenever we put up new episode. Every Friday afternoon, we do intend to upload new episodes. If you have any ideas for episodes, put them right down there in the comment section. So thanks for listening. Let's take it away. Episode number 4, race. Nathan, how you doing tonight, brother?
Very good.
Really? What's your definition of good?
Well, my health is good. I had a great dinner.
What'd you have?
Fish.
I find that shocking.
I love fish.
And did you cook it yourself?
Nope.
So you have people cook it for you?
I can cook.
Yeah, sure you can.
I can cook.
There's no doubt. Boil water.
I just don't have the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you like to have your fish cooked?
Well done.
Really? Who does that?
I can't do sushi.
Sushi?
I cannot eat anything that's raw.
I'm making fun of him. And by the way, he's got thick skin. I have thick skin. If you don't have thick skin, you may want to turn us off right now.
Yes.
We do have fun. We kind of go back and forth, a little banter. It makes it interesting. And I find it comical the way you pronounce sushi. Say it again for me.
Sushi.
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 Okay. Sounds very Japanese. Anyhow, so what we're going to talk about tonight is the definition of race. And what is your definition of race, Nathan?
Well, my definition?
Yes.
Okay, well, the race is real. There's no denying that race isn't real. When you go to your doctor, he's going to ask about your race. When you take the census, they're going to ask about your race. So we know what race is. I don't think there's a person out there walking, in the street. If you ask that person, what is race? He's going to tell you. Whether you're black, white, or Asian, that's their definition. But we know what it is. There are differences amongst human, family.
So I had this theory that I wanted to throw upon you. I know you're not going to expect this, but this conversation quickly is going to go to the dogs.
Well, that's what I want to get to the bottom of it, because the number one problem in America is racism. But how do you end or fight racism if you can't define what race is?
Right. So I have this theory about race, and it's a dog analogy, and it goes like this. What's the difference between a Chihuahua and a Saint Bernard?
Size-wise?
Is there a genetic difference?
Yes.
Really?
Well, the same species, but there's different breeds.
But genetically speaking, if you looked at their DNA, would there be a differential?
Whether there's differences or not, it doesn't matter. You can tell the difference.
Right. What I'm saying is, just like in humans, we are 99% of the DNA that makes you a dog. We can extrapolate that to the human race, and we can say that 99% of the DNA you and I share.
Yes.
All people.
I don't deny that. I'm just saying that there are differences within groups of people. Well, you're what, of German background?
I don't know.
You don't know.
I really don't know.
Okay,
I suspect one of my family members did one of those DNA tests, and it came back. I think it was mostly from England, Scotland, Welsh, in that area. But strangely enough, there was some American Indian in there, and there was also some African in there.
Well, yes. Well, it depends on how far you go back. If we go way back, well, let's say 500,000 years ago, we are Africans.
So what are you saying? That we're all African Americans?
Well, we are Africans.
Because Africa is a continent, by the way. And I don't want to get too far off the subject, but this is something I always found bizarre. If you're Irish American, you're called Irish American. If you're English American, you're English. I don't know that I've ever heard that one, but if you're Italian American, you're Italian. You're Italian. None of those are continents. But strangely enough, Jesse Jackson decided to come up with the phrase African American. It used to be Afro American, then it became African American. That's an That's an entire damn continent.
I know, but look, Larry Elder, who I really respect.
Yeah, my man. I
Yeah,
like
he's
Larry.
my man. I like Larry Elder. He preferred to call him people to call him Black Americans, or
No hyphenation. He actually doesn't prefer a hyphenation.
well, he
just
rather
black.
yeah he rather people call African Americans Black Americans, and his reasoning is this: his ancestors been here for hundreds of years, so he's American. Well, let's say a guy from Nigeria just came over. Now that person is an African American, so that's his distinction.
Well, not necessarily. He would be Nigerian American.
Well,
Africa is an entire damn continent.
Correct.
We don't call them Euro Americans,
Yeah.
and we don't call them Asian Americans.
Correct.
We Chinese American, Vietnamese
Yeah.
American, which you are, but like Theodore Roosevelt, I don't believe in hyphenations. I don't think that
Correct.
that does a country well.
Yes. So that's the distinction. Larry Elder considered himself as a Black American. But here's the problem. You're white American, right?
I don't call myself that. I call myself American, but to play along with your silly little game, yes, sure.
Yeah. So we should drop all the hyphenated, shouldn't we?
Theodore Roosevelt said that back around 1920, that there should be no such thing as a hyphenated American.
Yeah.
You should be an American. You should adopt the culture of Americanism, whatever
Yes.
that means, hard work, freedom,
I agree.
free speech. The list goes on and on. No, with no guarantees to cross the finish line at the same time, by the way. And that's a huge differentiation that we'll get into. Back to the dogs, though. What do you prefer in a dog?
I like a border collie.
Why?
They're the most intelligent of dogs. They can be trained easily.
So intelligence. You like intelligence. What else? Trained easily.
Well, they look pretty nice.
And you like the way they look, so the aesthetic of it. But what's wrong with the Chihuahua?
They're loud.
So
it's tough to train a Chihuahua.
So you get my point here. Maybe I'm going to kind of go to the conclusion and talk about this in the initial narrative, but maybe racism, which you're a little bit loath to talk about, and I understand, isn't an ism. Maybe it's a preference. Maybe you actually prefer something over something else. Could that be a lot of what we get a little discombobulated about here in America?
So it's okay for me to say I prefer a collie over like a Chihuahua. There's nothing wrong with that, is it?
Not that I'm aware of. By the way, if you're a racist, if you're any kind of a supremacist, black, white, yellow, green, go ahead and turn this off now, because we're not talking to you. We're talking to people that have an open mind, that have a liberal mind in the classic sense, that want to get to the truth.
Yes. Bottom line is we want to face racism and fight racism. But in order to do that, we have to know the truth about race or the differences amongst the human groups or races. I think so. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to have anything against any one group.
Yeah. So let's talk about social constructs. What is a construct? What is a social construct?
Well, you often hear people say that race is a social construct, not a biological one. And I disagree with that. I think race is real. It's a biological construct because you can tell the differences.
What is race? Let's stop right there.
Well,
why don't you answer?
It's a matter of semantic.
Opinion.
It's a matter of semantic. You can call it group if you want to, or ethnicity. Call it whatever you want.
But so could race be a synonym for ethnicity?
It can be, yes. Well, look at the census.
Yeah, good question. Why do we have a census in the first place? What are they trying to, ultimately, what is the goal with the census?
Well, lots of things. I mean, demographics, voting. Don't they want to know which group, a certain group, live in a certain area? Don't they want the data on that, don't they?
But maybe they want data to supply taxpayer money to certain groups that they feel are disenfranchised.
Yes, I mean it's a huge, demographics that they deal with that, and I don't want to get into it. But bottom line is, they do ask about your race when you go to see a doctor. Don't doctors ask you about your race?
Yeah, and I always put in there none of your business.
Well,
I never put it in there. I refuse to answer that
well,
question.
I think you're not doing the doctors. Doctor has to know.
Why? Why does
Well,
the doctor have to know what my race
Asian
is? What does it
people.
matter? If
Well,
if I go interview for a company, what the hell difference does it make?
well, let's say you have a certain disease. There's certain groups or race has certain, tendency to have higher, let's say, rates of obesity. That's a race thing, isn't it?
But would that not be racism to say that certain elements of the
Well,
society, dispositively speaking,
if
are
you're
inclined towards certain types of diseases?
if you're a doctor, you want to treat your patient, and to treat your patient, you want to know your history, your family history.
I don't think that's why they're asking the question. I think I think they've been asked by the government to find out information about your race, to figure out how many people are going to see medical professions within a certain race.
I think there's indication of, let's say, your health issue. There are indicators. Then it goes back to your DNA.
Then why don't they just simply ask that? Because if you're asking me if I'm Ashkenazi Jewish, for example, maybe they're trying to pin something genetically on me. But again, if I answer that question that I'm Jewish, which is never one of the questions they ask, it's always Hispanic, by the way.
Well,
But they very rarely ask any of the categories such as Jews or Chinese or Japanese or.
see, you probably are more sensitive to that.
I am.
I am not. I don't care.
But
if they
you're
ask,
racist.
Well, define what a racist is.
I think we're going to never get to the bottom of that, but we're going to give it a damn good college try tonight. So if we go back to race, though, do you see those? We discussed this earlier in the pre-interview. We talked about phenotypes. Is that one of the markers for race, do you think?
Yes. When you take your DNA test, there's certain phenotype that they classify a certain group.
But prima facie, though, a phenotype to me are what are the observable differences between you and me.
Yeah, the
That's the way
appearances.
I perceive a phenotype.
Yeah, there's appearances amongst groups that they can actually classify. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, epicantic folds, the slanted eyes, that's an Asian trait, isn't it?
But if we bring that up, is that something that people are comfortable talking
Well,
about?
yes, there are Asians that are very sensitive to that.
Yeah. This brings up an interesting concept. To me, what we find as being uncomfortably racist to talk about in our community of America may not be the case in Vietnam. For example, and I find this really interesting. We've gone from thinking back in the 1700s, if you were 1% black, guess what you were considered?
Well, that's to me is
You were black.
I know that's nonsense.
Talking to you about how perceptions have changed. In
Yes.
the 1800s, if you were Irish, if you were Jewish, if you were Italian, were you considered Caucasian? No, you were not.
No.
You most absolutely were not.
Yeah.
And yet those have changed. And so you flash forward to today, and if you go into a restaurant, you see a black woman sitting there with a white man married with kids. Do you think anything about it?
No, I could care less.
I could care less.
I truly believe in freedom of association. So that's where I'm getting at, that you can have differences, but you also have the right to choose.
Right
freedom
to
of
choose.
yes, freedom of association is what freedom is all about, isn't it?
I don't know. Milt Friedman wrote a great book. I think it was called Free to Choose. And totally aside, I do want to pull you back though,
Okay.
and talk to you about the point that we were making about the constructs. Talk to us a little more about constructs.
Well, you can't say that race is a social construct. It has to be a biological construct. You and I, look at you. 90% of people out there that look at you and then look at me can say that that's a white guy versus, oh, he's Asian. You can't deny the fact that people can actually tell because it's a biological construct. It's not a social construct. You can't change a person's mind saying that, oh, he's not white. He looks white, therefore he's white.
But I think the people that may be on the receiving end of that, they may say,
See, you're playing with your mind when you do that.
What was I about to say?
Well, you're about to say that it's a social construct, that you're being told to not think for yourself, but think how people tell you what to think. That is, oh, you shouldn't call that person white.
So the social construct can never relate to race.
Well, they try to deny that there's such thing as race.
Let's talk about genetic adaptations.
Well, biologically,
of course,
we're different. I mean, Europeans have left the continent of Africa hundreds of thousands of years ago. So when they migrated north to Europe or Central Asia, you got lighter skin and lighter hair. Asian, on the other hand, went to the Far East, and that's how we look. So there's nothing wrong with different groups migrating to different areas and adapt to a certain environment. To me, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a biological fact. You look at the animal kingdom, it's the same thing. Does that mean that there's one race that is better than the other?
What do you mean by better?
Well, certain physical ability, I think there's differences.
Well, I don't see a lot of professional basketball players that are Vietnamese.
Correct. Therefore, that's where I want you to understand this. If there are differences in terms of groups or races, I think blacks are genetically better in terms of sports, certain sports.
But don't you see that some people would see that as just a blatantly off the chart racist remark?
That's where we can't get to the bottom of racism. Once I accept the fact that there's certain groups that can outperform a certain group, like blacks can outperform, certain groups in basketball, that's an undeniable fact.
But they would say, the people particularly on the left that are pushing this, they would tell you that you're prejudging. And if you prejudge, that is the essence of soft bigotry and maybe even racism, to prejudge.
Well, it depends on how sensitive you are to this. I'm not sensitive to it.
But a lot of Americans are sensitive to it.
Well, that's the problem. We can't solve racism if we're so sensitive to things like this. You gotta understand that there are differences. I'm not talking about all people are like that. So let's rephrase this. In general, blacks are better at competitive sports like basketball, football, than whites and Asians.
So in essence,
especially Asians.
So what you're saying is it's okay to group people by their immutable characteristics.
I did not say that. It's not okay to group anything.
Because what they would say, to bring that back around, is that is the very definition of bigotry and prejudice, to do that.
How am I a bigot when I point out the differences? If I can point out the difference between a Chihuahua and a dog.
A Chihuahua is a dog.
Well, a Chihuahua and a collie, I'm sorry. Is that bigotry?
Maybe it's soft bigotry for animal lovers that have one preference over.
So you're saying that we should not be allowed to point out the differences amongst the humans, traits.
I can tell you that one of the axioms that I believe in is that truth exposes contradiction.
Well, I think that truths can get to the bottom of racism.
But what happens when you have half of America that's not interested in getting to the truth?
That's why we can't get to the bottom of fighting racism.
Yeah. Roll the clock back to 1916. A young lady by the name of Margaret Sanger comes onto the scene.
Now that is a total nut.
Really?
Yeah, eugenics is totally off the chart. I don't want to deal with them. I mean, that's racist to the core.
But to let you know, the left has firmly embraced. As a matter of fact, they've given a wet kiss and a bear hug to the Margaret Sangers of the world. Matter of fact, Hilary Clinton says that I admire her greatly, and I'm saying don't take my word for it. Just simply do a YouTube search for Margaret Sanger, Hilary Clinton, and see what you come up with, and you may be a little bit shocked.
It was a great privilege when I was told that I would receive this award. I admire Margaret Sanger enormously. Her courage, her tenacity, her vision. Another of my great friends, Ellen Chesler, is here, who wrote a magnificent biography of Margaret Sanger called Woman of Valor. And when I think about what she did all those years ago in Brooklyn, taking on archetypes, taking on attitudes and accusations flowing from all directions, I am really in awe of her. And there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from her life.
And the ultimate extrapolation of eugenics and Margaret Sanger is since 1973, Planned Parenthood has aborted 60 million fetuses. I find this number horrifying, and it's a number that I think you need to hear. 60 million fetuses have been aborted. 1/3 of that 60 million, which would be 20 million, were Black babies. And the Black population makes up 1/13 of the population. Margaret Sanger intentionally put those abortion clinics in Black communities. She intentionally did that.
I believe it.
Well, there's no believing it. It's a fact.
Yeah,
it's a fact.
I've read about her.
So, and yet she's continually embraced by the left, continually. And her whole idea was to fix the gene pool. If you had an IQ, from the research that I did, below a certain number, she felt like your line of genes should be removed from the pool.
Yeah, eugenics. The Germans actually picked this up as well. So
yeah, good old Adolf, and I mean that sarcastically, picked that up, and that his Aryan race, his supreme race, stole a lot of what he believed in from what the left fully embraces with a big bear hug even to this day. To your right, you'll see a statue, and it's in every one of my videos that I do. And nobody's ever commented on that. They never ask about it. But there are a lot of pseudosciences, a lot of quackology in this world that people fully embrace. And to me, this is just a living example of the science that people believed in at one time. And if you look on the statue, this bust, what you find is the brain, the head. They've made markings on there. And according to those markings, they could determine intellect. They could determine how smart you were, whether or not you were going to be an honest person. There was like 500 different, there was a complete science that was built around it. Complete pseudoscience, total jack quackery. I mean, none of it ever existed. And that's why I put this on here, because so many people are willing to believe in things such as this. There are millions of people that believe somehow or another that a star alignment can make a determination of where, what's going to happen in the future with your life.
Well, that's not,
alchemy.
That's worse than pseudoscience. That's superstition.
Yeah, but they use this as an example, Margaret Sanger and her crowd, because this ideology came out in around 1840, and a lot of what Margaret Sanger believed in evolved around phrenology.
Yeah,
total
Well,
quackery.
well, having said that, race is one thing. I think culture is a different thing. I mean,
What's culture?
well, culture. You and I think, are more in common when it comes to culture than race. I mean, you're the white European race. I'm the Asian guy. But because we have values that are similar, I think that makes us more in common than our differences.
But what happens when you come? And there's been 55 million Americans the last time I saw that have come to America that were not born here, and a lot of those people have not adopted the American culture. What kind of problem does that set up?
Well, back to my rule: the faster you assimilate, the quicker you assimilate, the better off you will be.
A lot of people have come to America and have totally ignored that.
Well, that's where there will be conflict. History is about conflict of cultures. Look at history. Every time there's two groups of people, different cultures, you're going to have conflicts. So if there's no conflict, they can't do anything.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the news, the media. If there's nothing out there, there's no excitement, there's no news, they'd be unemployed.
It looks to me like a de-evolution of society in order to maybe push, if I could throw in the word Marxist goal at this point.
Yes, of course. I think that's the end game.
And in order for Marxism to be important or relevant, they have to break down all the social constructs.
And you have to find a disenfranchised group or race or culture, whatever you can find.
So there's constantly on the move to find a different disenfranchised group, of which you became disqualified last month, by the way. I don't know if you heard
yes,
about that.
we did talk about that.
Yeah.
So by definition, they can, when I say they, the left can actually change which groups are disenfranchised overnight.
So where's this all going? I mean,
Well,
what is the ultimate extrapolation to society? What does it mean to civilization and society?
Well, we have reached a point where we have become so divided as Americans that we can't look at similarities anymore. We should reverse that. Instead of diversity and inclusion and equity, we should look at assimilation. Go back to our common values. You and I should have common values that we can get together and overlook our differences, whether it's politics, physical differences, or sexual belief.
A lot of these people are nihilists, though, and they are trying to destroy. And they will tell you that I represent, strangely enough, 250 years later, my parents came here after, but they will say that I represent the original sin. So therefore, I must beg for forgiveness from society and I must do penance.
Well, by having two groups, one group is the victim, the other group is the oppressor, which apparently you are.
I was the oppressor, apparently, even though I had nothing to do with it.
I think it's not going to get anywhere. It's not going to resolve to anything. That further divides. There is no way that the majority of white people is going to give up their values to the left.
A lot of people have, though, done that already. They've given up.
You can see that. You can see...
because you're seeing a big fracture, particularly with this election, that was so thinly decided by such a small number of people.
But for how long?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, how long can liberals actually say, oh, I'm going to kneel, to be a male. I'm going to repent. I'm going to feel ashamed because of my whiteness.
They do it all the time.
Yeah. But how long is that going to continue?
I'd say it's been going on since the 60s.
Are you willing to give up your house, your income?
Well, now that's a great point. And this is the thing that I always find interesting about these folks that are so wants to tell everybody how moral and virtuous they are. But then you ask them, okay, well, who have you gone over to the east side of Dallas invited to come live in your house or fed them? Or, well, I give money to the government or through my church or whatever. But you personally, what have you ever done to change somebody else's life? And maybe some people can give good answers to it, but a lot of times when I look around where I live, I don't see homeless people coming in and out of their house at all.
So virtue signaling ends, and what else begins?
I don't know, you tell me. You're on a roll.
So I think it's not gonna help if you keep dividing America into groups, whether class.
Yeah. Let's be real, though. I mean, people like Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson, they made a lot of money
Well, there's
off of dividing.
there's money in the race industry. Yes. I
Yeah.
mean, if I really want to profit from the industry, I can do it. I can claim that the NBA is systemically racist against Asian.
How about Robin DiAngelo? How much does she make off of white fragility?
Oh yeah. So there's always room to point out problems. I can't see anyone out there that is trying to fix this. Get to the bottom of the truth. Have us see each other as Americans rather than different races, different cultures. We'll come together as, one common people.
Yeah. To me, it's taken major conflicts to bring peoples together. World War II finally started bringing all races together. I would say that the Civil War, to some extent, brought races together. And maybe that's what is going to happen in the future is major conflict.
Well, we have come a long way to get to this point. And recently, I think within a decade, things have become more divisive.
But there's no guarantee that society is going to perpetuate and continue to perpetuate itself. I mean, the Romans, after 1,000 years, they went into steep decline. We've been here for a quarter of that, and I'm seeing phenomenal declines. I mean, American economy, thank heavens, is very robust, and it's able to overcome them. It almost seems like it doesn't matter who's president, as long as businesses can prevail and capitalists can prevail, the country seems to heal itself.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to this issue of race. One, certain groups are less sensitive to another group when it comes to race. Don't you agree?
For sure.
Yeah. So,
And even more for sure by country.
yes, of course. Well, let's focus here in America. Overseas, race is a different topic.
In Vietnam, how much did you guys talk about race? I mean, you were 10 when you left, but
yeah. But from what I know from Vietnam, there is no such word as race or racism. You can't define it.
But
because they don't have that conflict where we have here in America. So to explain to them what racism is, that's a whole different view.
How do the Vietnamese think of the Hmong, for example?
Well, originally,
yeah,
they consider savages, just like we consider American Indians as savages. And there's actually a word for that, savage.
So that's how they were considered?
Yes.
But were they original to Vietnam?
They were mountain people. So they live in the mountains.
And another thing I find incredibly interesting as we talk about race is if you go to China or Japan, what percentage of the population is rather ethnically pure, and particularly in China and Japan?
Well, China, not so much. Japan is 99.9% homogenous.
That's phenomenal, even to this day.
Yes.
Why is that?
They're an island people.
So
they haven't been invaded. The Mongols invaded them, but was unsuccessful. They would never conquer until the Americans came.
So because they were so isolated,
yes,
that's what kept them ethnically
correct,
pure, I guess you would say.
Yes.
And so, but the Chinese are a little more diverse, but I've heard that they're like 95%.
Well, the 95% Han Chinese. But remember, what's Han Chinese? You have the Mongols that invaded them, that ruled them for hundreds of years. And then you have the Manchus that invaded them.
The Manchurians.
Yes. that invaded them and ruled them for hundreds of years. And you have the Turks that came.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, the Turks invaded from the west. There's Turco-Mongols that invaded. And you have the Tibetans that ruled part of China for a long time.
They're kind of on the outs these days, aren't
Yeah. And certain Chinese, I mean, they're not really Chinese.
Wow.
The ethnic, you know.
What a big swirling
China
melting pot.
is a huge country that
Yeah.
goes back to 4,000 years of, you know, different groups of people. But mainly, yes, the Han Chinese still are the most populous. Yes.
Well, I think this is a very interesting topic. Hopefully, we've been somewhat enlightening. We've started a conversation. I think personally, that's how you resolve issues between people, is by talking about it. And ignoring it is rarely a good thing. Thankfully, our founding fathers understood the value of free speech, which means a lot of times you may not like what I'm saying, and you may feel a temptation to call that hate speech or try to give it a label. But the reality of it is that process, that mechanism of free speech is what makes us free as human beings, and it prevents ultimately the ultimate conflict, which is revenge, which hubris always precedes nemesis, and
Yes.
our pride comes before the fall.
I agree. So First Amendment, very important. This republic would never be a republic if the First Amendment does not exist. The First Amendment is about offensive speech. If it's not offensive speech, then it's not, you know, freedom of speech. Should your sensitivity override my offensive speech? I don't think so.
Nathan Ton, thank you so much for coming on. I can't wait till we do the next episode. If we thought about what we're going to talk about. Oh yeah, we're going to talk about the new religion of the left.
Whoa.
That's going to be interesting. This should be up this coming Friday. I appreciate you listening to us. As always, like us, follow us, comment on us, give us ideas how to make the show better. Going off the air is not one of the options. And subscribe, hit the little bell when it pops up. Appreciate you listening to us. Have yourself a great day.